Now I want to just take a few minutes to share some highlights of results work and our most recent important successes. And I want to ask you to listen, knowing that these are successes that were made possible by the support of so many of you in this room. For those of you that are also new to results, I'm going to try to give you a little bit of a sense of how those successes came about and how a network of folks and activists in 110 U.S. communities and about half a dozen other countries that are not huge in numbers have had such a major impact on funding and policy, and what in turn that has meant to the world. Michael mentioned that I was a results volunteer before I came on staff almost 2 decades ago. And I would just say, by the way, when I came to DC, folks actually said that being a veterinarian was good training for working in Washington. But seriously, when I did come to DC, I was able to see the collective power of our work, which are constituents from all walks of life that are not paid lobbyists from all over 100 different communities, like here in Houston, reaching out to members of Congress all over the country, all political persuasions, with bold requests about things that matter. Because what we've noted is that we identify problems that are fundamental causes and consequences of poverty, and we find out all the time that policymakers don't even know about them, that these issues are dying for lack of attention. Issues like getting every kid in school, saving millions of lives and preventing tens of millions of families being pushed deeper into poverty by AIDS and tuberculosis, and making sure that every kid in this country can actually start school ready to learn a head start. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of the work we've done in the last year. So most of you are probably not familiar with something called the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. But you may be aware that a decade ago, AIDS and tuberculosis were ravaging communities across the world and threatening the very fabric of African society. An American friend of mine was working in Zambia, and he came to the U.S. to start working on AIDS activism because he couldn't bear it anymore when he found that the biggest growing micro-business in Zambia a decade ago was making coffins. And only a minuscule number of people were on antiretroviral treatment for AIDS, maybe 50,000 around the world in low and middle income countries. And millions were dying of tuberculosis, even though the treatment cost $10. 6 months of treatment, total treatment. There was no global mechanism to help countries fight these diseases. But working with members of Congress, Democratic and Republican, and allies in other countries, we helped launch this global fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria in 2002. And every year we've worked to get it funding. And since that time, it's actually got programs working in 150 countries around the world and has saved an estimated 6.5 million lives. And just this past year, we were key in achieving the first ever U.S. 3-year pledge to the Global Fund, U.S. Global Fund, getting 100 members of Congress to sign on to a letter to the President, and bringing activists from Africa to meet with editorial boards around the country, including the Houston Chronicle, and generating media all over the U.S. to make this happen. Can we get the next slide? Yep. And today, we've gone from, the next one? Yeah. Oh, sorry, can you go back? Sorry, back. Sorry. Yes, so I want to look at this slide, which you'll see, again, 50,000 people maybe in 2001. Over 6.5 million people now are actually on AIDS antiretroviral treatment, and it's fundamentally transformed the sense of what's possible with survival in Africa. Sorry, now next slide. So I carry around this copy of The Economist magazine for inspiration, which I would say The Economist is not usually my source of inspiration. This was the June edition, and if you'll see the title, it talks about the end of AIDS. And it details the science and the medicine that now show us it is literally possible to bend the curve and end this epidemic. And I believe we're at a transformational moment where through our collective work, we can actually see our way to the end of this epidemic, the epidemic of tuberculosis, the epidemic of malaria. Next slide. If we continue to ramp up progress, we could see no child born with AIDS by 2015. We could achieve massive reductions in TB and AIDS deaths. And it's far from done, but I actually believe in some ways that the turnaround of these diseases will be our generation's man landing on the moon. I want to tell you about one other campaign that we ran this spring, when the results played a pivotal role in an enormous success of a pledging conference for something called the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations. It's a mechanism to finance immunizations against the two biggest killers of young children on the planet, pneumonia and diarrhea. In the U.S., we were pushing right up until the day of that conference to achieve a United States 3-year pledge of $450 million, working with members of Congress, the media, and with our country partners. And we succeeded. And overall, that pledging conference, with our pledge from the U.S., plus other countries where we were working, raised enough resources that they estimate will vaccinate over 250 million children between now and 2015. Next slide. And that's going to save now 4 million children's young lives between now and 2015. And that's, if you do the math, a child's life saved every 40 seconds. And the other thing that, to me, that this is the sort of nexus of science and equity, because these are vaccines that are made available just in this country in the last year. So we're not waiting 20 years to get them to the poorest kids in the poorest planet. We're doing it in months. Thanks. The focus of our main campaign for the fall is getting every child, as you've heard, in the world in school and learning by 2015. And we know education has enormous benefits, especially for girls. I know Mary Ann's going to say a little about this in a moment, but I just want to give one example. In Uganda, studies have shown that girls with even a primary education are 50% less likely to be infected with HIV. Girls with a secondary education, risk is reduced by 75%. And that's hugely important because girls are massively higher at risk than boys. And the biggest age of risk is between about 12 and 18. It's literally a social vaccine against AIDS. But right now, tens of millions of primary school-age kids are not in school, and they're the poorest and most marginalized kids. So we're working to help get U.S. funding for a global partnership for education, to help poor countries develop bold national plans, and then give them, just to fill in the gaps to help them fund that. The vast majority comes from poor countries themselves. It's just really a gap filler that we're doing. Can I see the next slide? And just to point out, just for those of you that don't know the bargain that this is, foreign aid is actually 1% of the federal budget, and the things that we care about and fight for are about 1/3 of that. So about 1/3 of 1% of the federal budget have that impact. And we're also working here at home to expand and protect things like quality Head Start preschool so that every kid can start school ready to learn. I just want to close this description by going back to the next slide, please. Going back to the Economist article. And I want to point out, if you notice that title, The End of AIDS, actually ends with a question mark. And while if you read deeper in the article, what you'll see is that there are still some questions of the science and the medicine and how we deliver this, but mostly the science is showing us this is completely possible. And the question mark stems primarily from the question of whether we will have the collective political commitment and invest the resources to achieve what science and medicine are showing us can be done. And I guess I just want to end by saying that I believe our work has never been more important. We've never had more opportunity, but you also see the huge collective threats and challenges of this political environment, this economic environment. We are at the cusp of tackling these biggest killers, making education for all a reality. And I do believe that with our collective work, we can finish the job. And I just want to thank you for coming here tonight to learn about our work and for the partnership of so many of you that's made possible what you just heard now. So just thank you.